Welcome to Innovating Education. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and in each episode, we dive into the latest innovations shaping education today. In this episode, we're tackling a critical question. How can schools use classroom data more effectively to drive instruction and improve student outcomes? To help us unpack this, we're joined by a true leader in the field, David Woodward. David is the founder and president of Forefront Education. He's also the author of Universal Screeners for Number Sense and a nationally recognized expert in assessment driven instruction. Today, we'll discuss standards based classroom assessments and how technology is revolutionizing data driven instruction. If you're passionate about using data to improve instruction, or if you've ever wondered whether your school's assessments are actually helping students, this episode is for you. So let's dive in. David, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Riley. It's a pleasure to be here as well, and I'm thrilled to be invited. Thank you.
So, before we dive into the role of assessment in driving instructional improvement, I'd love to hear about your journey. What first sparked your passion for education and what led you to create Forefront?
Well, I've been in education for going back to 1990. After graduating from school, had an early interest in developmental psychology, and but wasn't really positive that I was going to go into education until quite a few years later. Started out in early childhood education. Literally, my first job was working with infants and then toddlers, and then I've moved up through the grades and now work mostly with adults. So it's been a long journey getting here. I found that I had a passion for it. I've had a knack for it and really enjoyed my career as a classroom teacher, which lasted for many years and then followed up with work as an instructional coach and as an elementary math specialist in a district here in Colorado. And it was a great career, and then saw an opportunity to expand the impact with this company Forefront that I have founded and allow me to kind of realize some of the ideas that I had, how to do leadership work and how to really improve systems for supporting teaching. And that's kind of the birth of Forefront there. And it's been a long journey and a very gratifying one.
So, I have to say, one of the things I really like about Forefront is how comprehensive it is. Essentially, districts can upload their standards based on grade level and subject, and then teachers use the platform to provide really specific feedback on how students are performing on each standard. So, to me, it's a game changer for meaningful assessment, especially when talking with administrators and parents about data and student progress. But for those who may not know, I think the first thing that we should talk about is what are standards based assessments and why are they important?
That's a good question. So standards based, standards aligned, it's a term that's kind of gone through some evolutions and with the evolutions of standards themselves. So this idea that you have standard expectations for a classroom or I mean a grade level curriculum, right? Is one that goes back a long way to when I was back in teacher college, really. And so this defining of what are the intended outcomes systemically, right, for whole districts and whole states is this idea, right? And then working from those intended outcomes backwards to then say, okay, so we this is what we want students to know and be able to do. And then you come back to that and you say, okay, so how will I then determine whether they are or where are they in their pathway towards achieving that goal? Is what I think of standard-based assessment, right? So that you've got this idea that we have established consistent expectations for all of our students throughout our system, and then behind that, then coming in with consistent ways of how we measure that progress towards proficiency. So that's what I think of as standards-based. Now, I think, however, that you could expand that definition just a little bit, and not to take us too far off track here, but there are a lot of assessments that align with other frameworks that are not necessarily standards as such. So you have things like, certain types of fluency assessments in reading that might not even have a standard in the state standard aligned to it, but that but it's an element of the learning that has been identified as important by that assessment writer and per the research behind that, perhaps to develop those measures. I think of those as standards aligned assessments as well in terms of in a broad kind of definition, even though they might not be skills and concepts that are defined cleanly in the state standards. So, but once you've defined those expectations, then you're there.
How do standards based assessments shift the focus from grades to actual student learning?
So, because you're looking at progress towards proficiency relative to that standard, it implies that the learning is ongoing and that you're not just simply measuring students relative to the assessment itself or relative to the peers, right, within that group. So by saying that you've got an assessment that's aligned with standards now, generally in classic assessment, when I was in school, and even as a teacher, we would count the number of points or whatever you want to call them on an assessment and then calculate some kind of percentage of correctness, right? Standards based assessments tend, and they don't have to be this way, but that what they tend to do is look at performance levels relative towards the goal. So, in order to try to shift the thinking on this, you get away from the percentage based and you go to some sort of other system. Maybe it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 system. Maybe it's a smiley face, flat face. The symbols don't really matter all that much. You could call it meeting. You could call it approaching, whatever. You could put different labels on this idea that the learning is kind of along a progression of learning. And so, because of that, when you're giving, like, if I got a B when I was in high school science, it it was this kind of rating of how I'd done, right? And then it was all kind of backward looking. With standards-based assessments, usually you're kind of more forward looking. You're like, "Okay, right now the child is approaching." Yeah, and the language itself implies, "Hey, there's more work to be done, and we're gonna get there, hopefully." And you might not get there before the end of the course, and you might get there towards the end of the course, but it still implies the growth potential that's there, and that the teacher themselves should, when grading, say, "Okay, we can reapproach that." So most people think of the idea of reassessment, and if I'm gonna do a retest on something, that should be offered as an opportunity to students within the confines of time, right? You can only go to a certain point. But if they got an approaching or they're quite low in their basic in their understanding of a topic, and you're like, "You're not there yet." Hopefully, the student then gets that feedback that says, "Okay, but you still have an opportunity. This is the remainder of the learning. This is how you're going to get there. This is the expectation that's been defined, and let's see what we can do to get through there with some continued learning, and then we'll assess again." So that's kind of a huge difference in terms of the standards-based mindset, right? So I don't think that's necessarily all just standards-based assessment, which is one aspect of this larger picture of a standards-based mindset as people are defining it.
Your recent article highlighted the importance of classroom assessment over standardized tests. Can you explain why?
Well, I'm very much in the business of improving student learning outcomes. Now, I recognize that student learning outcomes are generally publicly revealed through statewide standardized tests, right? And so, for better or worse, serves as a definition of success within our school systems as we define them right now. So, that very public facing standardized assessment of the state test was very different than a classroom assessment where it's all kind of personalized and intimate, if you will, between the student and the teacher. And oftentimes those things are just between them. Sometimes they're sent home to parents, but it's still a very low risk kind of situation. And so there's a huge difference there. But then we need to think about standardized assessments that have come in between the classroom assessments and the state assessments, which are generally considered either benchmark assessments or interim assessments that are given in different ways, but many of these are given through these online adaptive assessments. And I don't consider those to be classroom assessments either, even though they're kind of given at the class level and it's not a state assessment by any means, but it's an assessment that the teacher doesn't have any control over. It's an assessment that the teacher's not gonna be able to see the item by item results, to be able to analyze those results. It's really not a classroom assessment at all. So the major difference there, as I see it, in this question, like I say, I'm in the the business of trying to improve student learning outcomes. The interim assessments tend to be summative. That is, that you get the data back, it gives you a number, much like traditional assessments did. It might not be a percentage, but it's a scale score or something like this. It's measuring relative to the other students who took the test, so you're gonna get some kind of percentile out of this. But all that intimacy that I was talking about in a classroom assessment, where I might be able to discuss the responses with the students, where I might be able to analyze their results, is lost. In terms of the usefulness of interim assessments for informing instruction, it's it's minimal at best. I think you can honestly say that really you shouldn't pay attention to it at all in some ways, because your classroom assessments are going to give you much better information, much more focused, much more detailed, much more timely evidence is going to be coming from your classroom assessments. So those are the assessments that are going to be able to be utilized by the teachers to plan, to inform and modify instruction, reteach if necessary, all the things that you do as a teacher to hone your craft and to ensure that you're responding in the moment to student performance and the student understanding, student questions, right? All of that's coming from your classroom assessments. Your state assessments are not going to give you any of that. They're not intended to. They shouldn't be used that way. There's not enough information there, et cetera. The timeliness is gone. The interim assessments give you a little bit more timely evidence, but it's not detailed enough and it's not specific enough to really inform instruction. So your classroom assessments are the assessments that are going to give you the information that you need to be able to plan well and to instruct well.
What are the key characteristics of an effective classroom based assessment?
So, number one, it has to be aligned with the learning outcomes that you have been teaching towards, right? Or you could use classroom assessments as kind of a readiness assessment as well. So, in terms of gathering that formative assessment, but classroom assessments just really must be aligned with instruction first and foremost, right? The intended outcomes are what we're measuring. So that's a key, right? And then the tasks need to be well designed so that they will elicit the information that you're looking for. So what I mean by that is, I've seen an assessment that was in a program that's hot off the press. It's one of the current programs. The standard that they are assessing is counting to 100. It's a first grade assessment, and they've tried to do this through multiple choice. They give 4 different counting sequences: 55, 57, 58, 59, skipping a number here and there, whatever. Is A correct, or is B correct? Is C correct? It's just looking at lists of numbers. So the standard is to be able to count to 120 by the end of first grade. And I think I look at that task and I think, okay, if a student got that correct, would I know that they can count to 100? The answer is no. And if the student gets that incorrect, would I think that they probably can't count to 100? I don't think so either. They might very well be able to count to 100 without getting that question correct, just because they were maybe distracted when they looked at it or whatever. It's hard. It's just delivered on a screen to the child. You're looking at just lines of numbers. They might be bored and just guess. So I would not be convinced one way or the other. So the task has to be designed in such a way that you are actually going to find out the information that you're looking for. That just should be just obvious to the publisher who put that thing out and actually wasted the paper on that and wasting the teacher's time as well. So if you want to find out whether a child can count to 120, as in this example right here, you might want to sit with the child and count, right? Say, hey, would you start counting from the number 67? Let me hear you count from there. Oh, let's try it now from 98. Can you count? It's just that seems obvious, right? And then you get to this kind of secondary question of, okay, so paper and pencil assessments, you can certainly use those and they are excellent. There are many, many well-designed tasks out there, but you need to make sure that you are eliciting the information that is going to be valid. That is, that it's going to actually measure what you say that you're going to measure. That's important, okay? Now, the other thing that I think is important when thinking about designing classroom assessments is they're best when they elicit information along that trajectory. Like I talked about earlier when we were talking about standards-based grading, some students might be at the very beginning of their understanding, and then others are progressing towards it and approaching and meeting or whatever our words are that we are there. Really well-designed tasks will allow you to kind of say, this kid's got something there. We're not all the way there, but we're approaching. A writing task is a great example of this. If I just have a student write to a prompt, right? I can see their writing and I can analyze the whole thing. It's just a very easy example. It's a little trickier in math. It can be trickier in different subjects depending on where you are to write really good tasks, but well-written tasks will elicit all that information for you. And they are transparent, like I say, that so that you can analyze the work. I think it's just more difficult to get not only valid information, but meaningful information from assessments that are multiple choice. Not that you wanna just completely eliminate multiple choice. There are some good ones there that have great distractors that can kinda give you an impression, but they're packaged. It's like, "Oh, okay, does this approximate the student's thinking on this as well as I think it does?" If it's more open-ended, you can get more information.
I
You know?
agree. What role should formative assessments play in ensuring alignment between instruction and student mastery?
Well, formative assessment, just to remind our audience here, is a process, not a product. And what I mean by that is so I had some teachers one time. So the universal screeners for number sense have been around for quite a while. And there was some teachers that were using that in a project that they were doing for a master's degree. And so we did a little interview together and they said, well, are they formative assessments? And I said, I've got no clue whether they're formative assessments. That depends entirely on you, the teacher. Formative assessment is how you use the assessment results. It's not the assessment itself. If I give that assessment and then I put it into a file cabinet and forget about it the next day and never use those results, then it was not a formative assessment, period. But instead, if I collect the assessment results, think about them, maybe talk about them with colleagues, collaborate, think about, okay, so what's the best way for us to respond to this? What lessons might I provide for my students who might need a little like small group work? All that stuff that teachers do, that's formative assessment. That's formative assessment. So it's what you do with the assessment results that is formative assessments. So we know from Hattie's work and other kinds of big thinker researchers out there that formative assessment, when done well, is one of the most impactful things that we can do as educators. And so it should just be in everyone's toolbox.
You've talked about the danger of misalignment between instruction and assessment. What are the most common causes of this misalignment?
I think there can be a lot of causes to misalignment between instruction and what we want. I think testing drives most of that. Um, because of several things, right? So let's just say, let's start with the state test. And let's say third grade, end of third grade assessment, there's going to be a lot of addition and subtraction problems that can be presented symbolically without any context. Just add 186 plus 67, whatever it's going to be, right? So you're a third grade teacher. All your formative information on this child lets you know that they are developing their understanding, that if they have materials to work with, or if they can make drawings, if they're going towards that goal of understanding place value as it relates to addition and subtraction. And let's just say that your instructional curriculum and the philosophy, the school that you're working with is to really make sure that full conceptual understanding is developed so that children are flexible and fluent in their computational methods and not locked in on simply a traditional algorithm, right? But the reality is that the state test is 2 weeks away and 12 students might not make it. So teachers will then sometimes, in order to, even though that the curriculum is saying we're trying to teach conceptual development along with this, and even though the standards say, in Colorado at least, and in the Common Core, they say that the traditional algorithm should be utilized and mastered in 4th grade, not 3rd grade, right? 4th grade. So the 3rd grade teachers, however, in order to try to get more kids to turn from the yellow to the green on the test or whatever, from one performance level to the next, will do this last minute panic blitz of teaching everyone the traditional algorithm today. This is the way you're going to do it because I know that you can solve that problem by counting on your fingers if you have the procedure memorized. So, at any rate, the state assessment, there's that kind of pressure that I think causes misalignments. I think that this trickles down then to your interim assessments as well that drive that kind of thinking as well. There are some interim assessments that the best way to get better at passing the interim assessment is to take more of the practice tests, right? So if you're using an online platform that includes practice tests that go through that thing, and then at the interim assessment, you have a better chance of passing at that point. I wonder on that thing, what's the alignment there really? Because I think that at least a significant portion of that is just getting used to trying to take a test on that interface. So if that's the goal of our instruction, is for kids to be able to take a test through the computer, okay, we're well aligned. If our goal really is conceptual understanding of place value, being able to apply that for addition and subtraction, that doesn't seem like a very good alignment at all to me because that test is also going to jump all over the place, right? Because it's a general outcomes measure. And so therefore it might go into geometry, it might go into measurement, it may go into all of these different places. We don't even know where it's going, usually. And the teachers are pleased with that. They just say, go put your headphones on and sit over there and take another test. Um, I don't know. I have trouble seeing that if I'm working in my classroom on developing deep understanding of a single topic or a subsection of topics, right, in the curriculum, then throwing kids onto computers, I think, is probably not the best way to achieve that goal. And I think that's driven largely by the fact that schools are looking at that interim assessment and thinking, okay, if I can make that line go up and to the right, you know, everyone in the room at the end of the day, the teachers that are there in the room are gonna be like, "Wow, your line went up." And the principal's gonna be like, "Oh, your line went up." And you can even show it to the parents at the parent-teacher conference. "Oh, the line went up. Yay, everybody's super happy about this." But who knows what the child has really actually accomplished? We don't really know. Now the other thing, I might catch a little flack for this one as well, but sometimes I get concerned with CBMs, which are curriculum-based measures, which have a long history, and I get the purpose of these things, but I think that sometimes because there are programs that must use certain CBMs as defined by the district or whatever has said, "This is how we monitor progress is using this small set of assessments." You can use assessment 1, assessment 2, and assessment 3. So those can be good proxy measures of performance. So let's just take reading fluency as an example here, right? We know that reading fluency correlates well with comprehension, okay? But correlation is not necessarily cause, right? So we've got some teachers, though, that look at the reading fluency assessment that they have to use as a CBM. Their intention is to get children to understand the text, right? But because if they can make the line go up and to the right, the way to make that line go up and to the right is to teach the child to read faster. If I teach the child to read faster, I don't know if there's research on this, but the last time I looked at this, and it's been a number of years, just teaching a child to read faster did not actually result in better comprehension. There's a correlation there, but it's the cart before the horse. And so fluency comes with comprehension and with everything else that's there, right? But just trying to work on that one specific aspect won't do you any good at all. I mean, for instance, or reading nonsense words, right? And Dibbles, those people who put that assessment out, they're like quite clear. You shouldn't teach kids to read nonsense words faster, but not all the teachers are getting that message. And they're like, holy smokes, this kid was really low in their reading of nonsense words. I need to teach them to read nonsense words faster. It's not probably the best way to go at it. So I do blame assessments and credit assessments with doing good, but I do blame assessments for implying results. And this goes back to your question about misalignment, right? That they imply that we should do this and that the incentive structures are aligned with those assessments. And so therefore, it drives you away from the focus on the students that are in your classroom and the standards and the performances that you're hoping to teach towards.
So, if you could change one thing about how assessments are used in schools today, what would it be?
Well, we at Forefront are deeply committed to putting classroom assessments at the center of school improvement work. And what I mean by that is that if you have those assessments that are aligned with instruction, like we talked about earlier, at the center of the focus, that's the change that I would like to see in schools. Let's focus on the assessments that align most closely with what we are teaching. Let's make sure that those assessments are also core to our collaborative work in MTSS, RTI work that's going on, because then you've got multiple people involved in it. And so we need to make sure that everyone's eye is on the same work. And then also that to set goals around that in terms of school improvement type planning, thinking, okay, so by the end of the year, according to these classroom assessments, we want 95% of our students showing a conceptual understanding of full place value that's applicable to addition subtraction, as we've been talking about earlier. That's that kind of goal. So all of that aligned. That keeps everyone focused, eyes on the prize, clear, actionable goals, right? And things like that. That's what I would really like to change. My hope is that through that, and with the proper technology to enable that to happen, that we can also say, hey, we do too much assessment. We can actually cut back on some of maybe the benchmarking and interim assessments because they are redundant, and they are not only redundant, but they're distracting away from our focus. Because if you tell me that the goal really is that I want the scale score, median score, to go from 520 to 625, if that's the goal, getting the median scale score to go up, then the way to do that best is to get the kid practicing the test on the computer. That doesn't serve anybody, right? But if the goal is being able to be a good writer, if the goal is to be able to communicate your thinking through your words, if the goal is to be able to solve a problem and apply reasoning to solve a math problem, right? Then that's where we should be focusing not only our assessment, but all of our instruction. And if our instruction then gets better, the outcomes will get better, right? That's basic hypothesis of the whole thing. So if I could change everything, put the focus back onto classroom assessments, get those consistent across your system, right? So that we have common assessments constantly, and then remove the redundancies, get rid of the redundancies so that we can buy back some of our time, get back some of our money as well in the process, and get everyone focused with their eyes on the prize.
And just trying to make that a reality, I think that's going to require a major culture shift within a school district where assessment data is seen as a tool for growth rather than just an accountability measure, as you mentioned before.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think your state assessment just serves just fine as an accountability measure. If you need an accountability measure, throw that into the thing. I think it should be maybe at 20% of the slice, right? That is that it's one piece of the thing that you look at. The other thing that you look at is your observations of the teachers in the classroom. Are they showing up for work? That's always a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do as teachers in the classroom to demonstrate our competency. And that's the accountability measures that I think principals see, leaders see that in action. You get that feedback from parents too. I've got no problem with parent surveys and even student surveys. I used to give my kids a survey at the end of the year every year. It's like, here's my report card, you guys. Everybody, please fill it out. I would ask them, how did I do? And I got some very genuine. I mean, it was like sometimes it was fun to read those things, and sometimes it was like, oh man, how did I not see that? But there should be self accountability as well. But here, I mean, here's the thing, right? If we want our teachers to be accountable to the lessons that we're teaching and to the curriculum that we have invested millions of dollars in some of these larger districts in purchasing, and then the professional development that goes with it about implementing that curriculum that we are investing in, then we should be using the assessments from that same thing, or we should be using assessments that align directly with all that stuff. Not a third party assessment that's not aligned in time or in philosophy or in anything else. You say that it's a major culture shift. This is new. The culture shift is only the last 20 years, not even. I've thought about it many times how I can maybe somehow try to figure out the rise of the online interim adaptive assessments and how much money they accumulated over the last 20 years and when that really took off. My feeling is that those really got into place in most districts 2007 through 2015. And so this isn't old. Standards-based grading is harder to change because we have traditions going back to my childhood about grading, right? I think we can weed out some of the overassessment that's come into place.
And just from a generational aspect, I remember growing up being assessed. And psychologically, with millennials, especially who are mid career at this point in their journeys, that's all we've known,
Right,
right?
right.
From third grade, we were doing these assessments.
Sure.
And so then you go into teacher college and that's what you're learning. You're learning, okay, this is what I'm going to be graded on. And this is what is going to affect my career or these standardized tests. So I definitely think it is a culture change, even if it hasn't been that long.
Yeah, I mean, well, but in terms of the large scale assessments, those do go back to my childhood even. So we're talking about early 1970s. I was taking the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. It was a bubble test. They gave it to us every year. We got percentiles back. It was not very dissimilar from what's going on right now with state testing. So that's always been there. I think what I'm talking about is this extra layer of assessments that came into the middle that are supposed to predict the large scale assessment. That's new. That's what's new, is the benchmarking assessments that are coming in now. I mean, I saw them come in as a teacher. I shouldn't say that I never saw them as a teacher because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we had a locally mandated assessment when I was teaching first grade that was a bubble assessment. That is multiple choice. The assessment is on one piece of paper. Find the correct answer and fill in the bubble on paper number 2, right? For first graders assessing reading. It was the most ludicrous piece of nonsense that I think I've ever witnessed in my career because there was no way. I had a lot of struggling students in a highly impacted school that was English language learners who were barely competent in English, and this test was given in English. I mean, it was like I looked at the results and I was just like, "Okay, this is nonsense. This was only a waste of time," and it was super difficult to manage. Kids would start rolling on the floor because they didn't wanna do this thing, and I'm like, "Everybody has to stay in their seat because the bell's gonna ring at 60 minutes. The timer, see the timer right there? I have to." Oh my god, it was just awful. And a waste of time and a waste of money, and I mean, they're always the best of intentions. I wanna put this out there. I do believe that there are good intentions with almost all of this work, okay? Sometimes I think that sometimes the intentions of certain marketing and sales departments is a good intention for the company. I'm not so sure that I think the child sometimes is secondary in that decision making because I think there is some messaging that comes out and there's some promises that are made by certain organizations that overpromise on things, and so therefore it's okay, I don't like that. But I think by and large, our intention with all this stuff is very good. I just think that we're missing the mark sometimes.
If you could leave our educators with one key takeaway,
Just listen to your students. Get to know your students and understand them. Don't just grade them, right? And then use that understanding to guide your instruction.
wise words, powerful words.
This is a lot of fun. Thank you for letting me talk about the things that I'm passionate about. I always appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, all your teachers out there that are listening to this, because you are the ones that are the most important in so many people's lives. Thank you.
And thank you. To our listeners, thank you for joining us today on Innovating Education. We're proud to be sponsored by Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like these possible. So if you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. And if you're an educator looking to transform the way your school assesses data, please check out Forefront Education. You can book a free demo to see how their tools can help. Until next time, keep innovating, keep learning, and keep making a difference in the world of education.